Welcome back to the poll position. I've placed a poll on my channel page asking who you think will win the presidency. Feel free to place your vote after watching the video. The presidential election is upon us, and we're all waiting to see who will win. But who do I think will win, and what are the ways I predict the results? I've made predictions for elections before, but I think I should explain how I actually come to the conclusions that I do, and how other analysts do the same. The first and most obvious way is through the polling. Polls provide a good insight into the numbers of an election. They not only show how voting trends change over time, but also the demographic details of the electorate. The second way is for analysing the social and economic climate as a factor that will sway people. This method was partly popularised by Allan Lichtman, who predicted every election since 1988 correctly, with the notable exception of the 2000 election with George Bush and Al Gore. The third metric is how the campaigns are actually run, where they target, and how much turnout they get from campaigners, weighed up with numbers from early voting. Most pollsters tend to go for a mix of all three as metrics, as they each have something different to add, as well as their own shortcomings. My methodology uses a multi-step approach as it intertwines all aforementioned metrics together. I like to call this the crochet approach. In step 1, I assess the data of the polls in each battleground state, along with both nationwide polls and polling from key demographics, such as minority voters, independent voters, and women. An example of my findings is that Kamala Harris has an advantage with independent voters and women voters, and has a much smaller polling deficit amongst men than previous Democratic candidates. This has also been commented on by many pollsters, but arguably doesn't seem to be focused on enough by pundits when predicting the outcome. Statewide polling can be unreliable, as it usually has a smaller sample size and many pollsters tend to have a partisan lean that skews their results. I compensate for this by balancing the more reliable polls with demographics and previous election results from their respective states. I also use approval ratings, as they often tell us a lot about the perception of the two candidates in the eyes of the electorate. Kamala Harris has a much higher net approval rating than Donald Trump, which is key when looking at swing voters, who often vote based on their perception of the two candidates. Net approval isn't always useful, but the difference can tell us a bit about how the race will go. Step 2 involves assessing the nationwide picture and the popularity of the candidates from the incumbent party, as that can have an impact on both the presidential race and the congressional races. For this, I tend to use Allan Lichtman's 13 keys, as they are very comprehensive and generally reliable. The final metric I use is the numbers from early voting. Early voting isn't necessarily a useful method of measuring the vote, as it only really tells us about the party registration, and people can vote differently to how they are registered. But it does tell us a bit about voter enthusiasm, and the possible size of turnout, with states like Georgia seeing the number of early votes on a par with the overall turnout in 2020. The numbers are a little more murky with this one, so I tend to rely on this the least, but the turnout in states like Georgia, showing Republicans on 48% and Democrats on 45%, shows the Republicans may have an advantage going into Election Day, meaning Democrats will need to drive up turnout on Election Day. This is the first time I'm using this method, and I don't have time to go into detail about every state. But I have confidence in my methods, and I feel as if my calls today will be relatively accurate. If I'm wrong, please feel free to joke in the comments. Just keep it civil. I can say, using my method, that Kamala Harris will be the next president of the United States. I predict that she will win the states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Nevada. I leave North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Iowa as toss-ups. Arizona and Iowa could possibly skew to Trump, but I'm just a little nervous as recent polling has showed those states to be very competitive. Based on my research, it seems that polls may be underestimating the Democrats, just as they did in 2022. Despite Trump being in the lead in some states, it would take less than a 1-point swing in some of these states for Harris to win, and we have seen swings like this before. In 2022, the Senate elections in Nevada and Georgia both have Republicans leading by 1 point, with Democrats going on to win those states by small margins. My Senate predictions are a bit less favourable to Democrats. I believe Democrats will most likely lose the Senate, but have an outside chance in retaining a 50-50 split with Montana. I predict that Democrats will lose West Virginia, with Montana rated as a toss-up, whilst I believe Democrats will hold Ohio and the other battleground states. Republicans will most likely hold on to Texas and Florida, but may lose Nebraska to an independent, making it hard for any party to form a majority. In simple terms, the best case for Democrats is 50 Democratic seats and 49 Republican seats and 1 independent seat, whilst the worst case for them would be 51 Republicans and 49 Democrats. Conversely, I believe Republicans will lose control of the House of Representatives, with an outside chance of a slim Republican majority. Democrats could win between 230 and 216 seats, whilst the Republicans would win between 219 and 205. My prediction should not be taken as certain, due to the fact that this is a really close race, and my prediction shouldn't be taken as a show of support for either candidate. I'm not going to be endorsing anyone on this channel, but I believe, based on the research I've conducted and the data I have analysed, we will have a Harris presidency with a divided Congress. I may be wrong, and people are free to disagree with my methods and my predictions. In the end, we'll just need to see what happens. The important thing for Americans, and indeed anyone living in a democracy, is that you vote. If you feel as if your vote doesn't count, then that is all but certain if you don't cast a ballot. It is an incredible right that gives citizens enormous power and should never be taken for granted. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment below. Be sure to answer my poll on my channel. As always, have a great day, and I'll see you next time.